Hello? Oh, there we go. Hello. My name is Randy Barlow, and this is Patrick Uiterwijk. Close enough. We work on the Fedora infrastructure group, and we work at Red Hat. I'm going to tell you, we're both going to tell you a bit about how rebuilding containers was, to me, a surprise. Maybe not to Patrick. I was surprised that it's harder than it sounds like it would be. So we're going to start off by describing the problem we faced that I didn't even know was going to be a problem. I'm going to tell you a bit about a solution we thought through that turned out to, I think it would have worked, but it was more complicated than the solution we finally landed on. So we'll present all three of those to you. This quote will be the only part of the presentation you'll remember. It's a quote from XKCD. OK, so containers are popular these days, becoming more and more popular. And Fedora does ship some containers. We have our own registry. So you can pull down Fedora's base image, and we have a few more applications that are also available in there. If you're not very familiar with containers, they are built with layers. So you have what we might call a base layer, which has things like glibc and OpenSSL and sort of very common core packages. And then you usually have a second layer that's got the application that you want to deploy, like a web server or a chat server or something like that. Whenever there is an update to that base layer, the second layers need to be rebuilt. And if there's third layers or fourth layers, we have to go and kind of chain build all of these things. So that's maybe a lot of work for computers to do, but it doesn't sound that hard. You just kick off a computer and you build all of them, and you do some dependency solving, and we have technology to do all these things. One thing that's a little bit specific to Fedora that became a problem was the containers Docker files have a from line. So when you're creating a container, you say from Fedora, and you might say it's from Fedora 27 or from Rawhide. And what you're indicating there is which base layer you want to build your container on top of. We use a system called OpenShift Build Service, or OSBS. Is that what it stands for? Yeah. Build System. OSBS. And OSBS will take these Docker files and start building from that from line. So if it says from registry.fedoraproject.org/Fedora:/Rawhide, it'll go and get to our stable registry, pull down the Rawhide base image, and then build the layer on top. Whenever we need to do a mass rebuild, meaning we need to build the base layer and all the other applications, the thing that gets tricky is that we don't want to do a rebuild and then immediately publish the thing we built to the stable registry. What we want to do in Fedora is we want to propose that as an update in Bodhi. And that can take time. We need to put it in Bodhi, wait for some testing to happen, wait for some karma. And if you have this build system cranking along and it makes it makes the base layer, then it has to wait a week or something until the karma goes through and it goes out to then build the next layers. And by then you might have to do another one. So we need a way for the OpenShift Build System, not service, to build the base layer, then immediately build all the next layers, and then propose all of that as an update to Bodhi. And that from line is actually a big problem, because when it builds the base layer, that's not going to be in the stable registry. It's going to be in another registry called the candidate registry. So that's one of the problems. And then the last problem is actually just that this is all very expensive for infrastructure. These layers are very large, and if we start doing these rebuilds every time anyone updates a package, we're going to be creating lots of containers, and we have a retention policy. So this becomes a whole lot of data to keep on our storage systems. So that's also a problem. Oh, by the way, I'm very open to questions throughout, so maybe we can consider it a bit of a conversation. So feel free to ask questions. If there's any right now, we can. OK. We had to get another inspirational quote, so we searched the internet and found this one. So Patrick actually first alerted me to these problems because I had been planning to add containers to Bodhi around this time of year, actually. Last year, we worked on Bodhi to make it flexible so it can handle more than just RPMs. It now does modules as well. And so on the roadmap, it's natural to add containers to Bodhi so that we can push these updates through. So I had a little task on my computer that told me to go and add containers to Bodhi, and it was going to be easy and no problems. And I was chatting to Patrick probably in November or something. And Patrick's like, there's a big problem. And he told me all about the from line and the building and the registries and how we weren't going to be pushing things around. So we came up with, we had a couple of meetings then, and we came up with this idea that the OpenShift Build System would ask Bodhi to run a compose after it made the new base layer. So that would mean, you probably have heard us talk about the term mashing with Bodhi. So it'd be like asking Bodhi to do this mash, although we say compose now. So we're going to ask Bodhi to do a compose on that thing, and that's going to take it out of the candidate registry, put it into the stable registry with a testing tag, and then we would go and build the next layers. So I actually started implementing this. Bodhi has the beginnings of an API to control composing, and it's actually a very nice thing, but it's a very complicated system, and it occurred to us later that we could do this in a much simpler way. So that's sort of like the direction we started off going, and then we found a better way to go. Patrick is going to describe our new approach to you, if you can find how it works.
Okay. So, as Randy explained to you, our build system is the OpenShift Build System. Now I'm almost making the same mistake myself. Which has a bunch of plugins that it runs as part of the actual build to control, like pushing to the candidate registry. It already has a few of the features that we would be needing for these rebuilds. One of the things we came up with doing is, instead of between layers, push everything first out to the stable registry and then build from there, instead add a build override system. I'm not sure whether people are, I'm going to assume that most people here are at least somewhat aware of how build overrides work for RPMs. But in short, it comes down to, instead of having to wait for it to go to stable, you mark this one as, I want to build things on top of it, so make this available in the build route so I can start building things on top now. The idea is to do pretty much the same in the candidate registry. So if you mark it as, I want to build on top of this, we will tag it with a, for example, F27 build tag, which is the tag, which is a way that OSBS determines that, no, sorry. We would then be adding updating the plugin in OSBS, which determines what the base layer of the current build is, and override it with the first determine, is there a candidate, a build root override for the current from line. So for that, we look in the candidate registry, is there a container tagged as branch-build? If there is, we'll pull that down and we override the from line to use that. That way, you can be sure that that one is going to be used. So if you build a Fedora base layer now, and you mark this build root override, it would take about 2 minutes before you can build the next layer instead of having to push it all the way through. So only after you actually rebuild all of the containers would you then need to actually push anything to the stable registry, And one of the main reasons we wanted to do that is because not only is rebuilding expensive, but also pushing from the candidate registry to the production registry is hard, because the production registry is a way more upscaled system where we also need to push the content out to a content distribution network. I can talk. Also, hopefully we would get a tool which can control all of this. I'm not sure if Jan is here, but basically FreshMaker from the Factory 2.0 team is a tool which controls rebuilding of artifacts. So it should then pick up the base layer, create a build root override, and start building the next layers, and so on, until we have finished building all of the chain we are currently working on. Right now, we currently, we are supposed to, every 2 weeks, rebuild every single container we have in the Fedora registry entirely from scratch. As Randy already said, that is kind of really expensive, so ideally we'd only rebuild those containers that have important updates, and from there on, so their children, and not have to rebuild everything every time, every 2 weeks, because that's a lot of data to bump through.
So in summary, we're addressing the problems, the from line problem, by writing some plugins. We're hoping to use some more French names for these new projects, because we have Pagure, and we have, what else do we have?
Nuance.
Oh, Nuancier. I can't even say these things. So we came up with one called Millefeuille. Okay. Yeah. So. Yeah, we're planning to use some more difficult to pronounce words to help us all practice our French pronunciation. But yeah, we need to write some OSBS plugins, and they're going to be used to do things like build root overrides and changing that from line. And this way we can sort of get these updates going through without having to wait for the karma. So yeah, thank you all for coming, and if you have any questions, feel free.
No.
A good question. So the question is, are we talking about just Docker, or will we, maybe I can rephrase, the question is, will we be using RPMs inside Docker, and are we only talking about them?
Yeah. In a Fedora layered image build system, which is the name for our system with OpenShift Build System, everything needs to be installed from RPMs that are in Fedora. So
for us, this is a matter of policy. So we need all of our software to go through a package review process, and the RPMs are sort of where that happens, and then you can build a container out of those RPMs. Yeah. And also, you made me think of something. We actually also wish to add support for Flatpaks. Owen is here. And so I imagine that, Flatpaks don't have the from line though, do they? Yeah, and you don't need to rebuild when you change the base there. So that's actually. Yeah, yeah.
So Flatpaks don't have the layer rebuild problem. They do have the problem of figuring out when you want to rebuild and being so minimal about that.
Mm-hmm. So there are some challenges in common, some that are not so.
I think, it seems like, I don't know, I think the place that's most common is the place that is going to fire off these builds. You might be doing different things once you fire them off, but you do on a single system. Maybe it's FreshMaker, or I don't know if you have plans. But,
So the comment for the recording, the comment from Owen is that we don't have the layering problem with the from line and so forth, but we do have a common problem, which is identifying when we need to do a rebuild and kicking it off, and perhaps FreshMaker could be a common solution there. Any other questions?
So is Bodhi aware of this override at the container level? Like, for example, could a layered image, a rebuilt layered image go through into stable even if the base image was loaded down?
Okay. The question is Bodhi aware of containers and specifically the layering, and could a dependent layer go to stable before its base layer goes to stable? So suppose the base layer was voted down because it eats kittens or something, but someone else gave a lot of karma to the kitten eating program or something. Bodhi is not currently aware of containers at all, actually. This is something I've been working on over the last few weeks. That is a problem, though. There's two ways to do this, or there's probably more than two ways. One thing we could do is we could create mass updates. So when we do these mass rebuilds, you would get a Bodhi update that's just got everything. But the problem with that is that when you're getting feedback from someone that says, -1 doesn't work for me, well, which one didn't work for you? Or was it the base layer, or were you testing some other program? But the problem where if we make them all separate updates is then they can go independently, and then you end up with a problem there too. So a couple ideas that I've been thinking through and actually would appreciate feedback on are we could add a system where you can relate updates together. So you could say this update and this update and this update are connected, and that would sort of mean that they all go or none go. And the nice thing about that is then the feedback on each one is specific to that container, but also you can prevent problems like the dependent layer going before the base. A similar thing we could do is just maybe different than that rafting, but just sort of an actual formal dependency relationship. So being able to say this update depends on the other, but not necessarily the reverse, because that way the base layer could go out, but not a broken rebuild of a different thing. And since the other layer is still there, this will still work. And I'm sure there's other ideas that I'm not remembering right now, but yeah, if anyone has any thoughts about that, that is a problem we will need to solve. So, good question. Did I repeat that question? I think I did. Okay.
Related to that, what if a container build fails that depends on base layer that is succeed? Does that block the base layer?
Okay, the question is if, suppose we built the base layer and then while building the dependent layers, one of them fails. Should that block the base layer? I don't know, actually. I haven't thought about that. That could be a matter of policy. From a technical perspective, I think it could work. It's maybe a matter of what we would want. I've thought about a similar problem before. We already make OS trees, and we have a similar problem there. Like, you can have things like a CVE, right? So there's like an OpenSSL problem. If the RPM is ready to ship out, but the OS tree has a problem, do we wait, or do we give the RPM out now and hold the OS tree until it's ready? And there's pluses and minuses. It's very confusing for users if we sort of stagger release these things, because then people like to say simple things like the Fedora project has solved the CVE. If we start staggering when they release, it becomes complicated. Well, they fixed it in the RPM, but not in the container, and that container's broken, but this one works. I actually thought about this a lot, and I don't know how I feel about it. I can see the confusion being bad, but also why would you not want to get the updates out when you have them ready? So yeah, I don't think I actually have an answer to that question. Do you have thoughts about that?
No.
If this is dependent layer,
The only thing is that
base layer doesn't require anything from that dependent layer. Obviously, it can. I think it should go out.
But if change in base layer broke, build dependent build or multiple builds, it might be regression.
Well, in that case, then the base layer would have a problem with it, and you should report feedback there, right? If this is an issue only with the dependent layer, then I don't see that blocking the base layer.
Yeah. For the recording, the comment from Dusty is that a situation like this could be that the base layer is broken in some way that's actually causing the dependent layer to fail to build. And if that were determined to be the case, we probably wouldn't want to ship the base layer. There are other reasons. You can't automatically know that, though, because it could also fail because we had a network problem or some kind of infrastructure problem or something completely unrelated. So yeah, I think maybe some human judgment could be required in these kind of cases.
Since I believe that we're building the tip of the diskette as a container, so if somebody broke their container diskette,
Yep.
it's going to keep on failing.
That's true. That it could also be that the packager changed diskette, but maybe didn't do a build yet, but it was broken and. Yeah. Yeah. I think we have about a minute and a half. Any other thoughts? Is everyone very excited about putting containers through and all of this? How many containers are in Fedora? Do you know? I would guess 20 to 30, not a lot yet.
Yeah, that sounds about right for now.
I did look at it recently, but I didn't count it. I just looked at it with my eyes, and it was on my screen. It was about this many. You know.
To that note, we also, if you maintain a package or a piece of software that you think would be good containerized, feel free to open a container review and you can get it into the system so people can start using it.
Yeah, Dusty's comment is that this is open for every packager. If you're a Fedora packager or want to become one, you can now you can already go and submit it. It's basically the same as the package review process, except you write a Docker file instead of a spec file. And once it goes through review, then you can do it. The only tricky thing is that there isn't a formal way for you to do updates yet because Bodhi doesn't know about them. So I actually don't know what is the process for that right now.
Right now, it's just part of the automatic rebuild. So that's why we are at least supposed to, which didn't work until recently, rebuild all of the containers every 2 weeks and push them out because that's the only way to actually get updated containers out.
Right. And I assume if you had some kind of CVE you need to address, you would probably reach out to release engineering and say hey, this is important. So we are out of time though. So thank you all for coming and listening to our talk.